The unconscious decides before you do, and almost no one notices. You believe you decide. You believe you choose with logic, awareness, and control. You believe your decisions are the result of what you think at the moment you act. But this is one of the greatest illusions of the human mind. Freud and Jung arrived at this conclusion in different ways, but they converged on the same unsettling point. When you think you are deciding, the decision has already been made long before, at a level you cannot see. And while you remain unaware of this, you live believing you are in control, when in reality you are merely rationalizing choices that were already born in the unconscious. This is uncomfortable to hear, because it threatens the image you have of yourself as a rational, conscious person who owns their own life. But psychoanalysis was not created to comfort. It was created to reveal. And what it reveals is simple and disturbing at the same time. Most of your life is driven by internal forces you did not consciously choose. Have you ever made a decision and only later realized it led you exactly where you swore you never wanted to go? Have you ever gotten involved with the same type of person even knowing it would hurt? Have you ever sabotaged something important at the decisive moment? Said something you didn't want to say, did something you didn't want to do, reacted in a way that didn't match who you believe you are? These are not accidents. They are manifestations of a psychic system that operates below the surface. Freud said that the ego believes it governs, but it governs only a small part of the territory. The unconscious is vast, ancient, and powerful. It does not ask for permission. It does not explain its reasons, it simply acts. And then the ego runs after it, creating stories to feel in control. That is why you often feel like you don't know what came over you, because it truly wasn't the ego that did. Before you think, the unconscious has already evaluated. Before you decide, it has already chosen the direction. Before you act, it has already pushed. Modern studies confirm this, but Freud already knew it intuitively. The brain initiates action before consciousness registers intention. In other words, you become aware of the decision after it has already begun. The feeling of choice comes later, like a delay. And this changes everything. Because if the unconscious decides first, then understanding the unconscious is more important than trying to control behavior through sheer willpower. Most people try to change habits, attitudes, and choices at the conscious level without ever touching the true engine of decisions. It is like trying to change the course of a river by pushing the water with your hands, without ever touching the source. The unconscious is formed by early experiences, repressed emotions, forbidden desires, unprocessed fears, and patterns learned before you even had language to understand them. It does not think in words. It thinks in images, sensations, impulses. It does not care about what is right or wrong. It cares about psychic safety, repetition, and the discharge of tension. Freud called this repetition compulsion. You repeat not because you want to, but because something in you needs to repeat. Even if it hurts, even if it damages, even if it sabotages, because the unconscious prefers the familiar over the healthy. It prefers what is known over what is safe. If pain was familiar, it returns to it. If abandonment was familiar, it recreates it. If chaos was familiar, it seeks it. That is why so many people live in cycles. They change the scenery, but not the destination. They change jobs, but repeat the same conflicts. They change relationships, but live the same pain. They change cities, but carry the same emptiness. The unconscious recognizes patterns, not conscious promises. And here lies the psychological threat that almost no one notices. As long as you do not recognize the unconscious as an active agent in your decisions, you believe the problem is always outside, in other people, in circumstances, in bad luck, in timing. And so you feel like a victim of something that is, in fact, being directed from within. This does not mean guilt. It means psychic responsibility. Freud never said you choose your unconscious, but he said you are responsible for making it conscious. Because that which remains unconscious manifests itself as fate, Jung deepened this even further. For him, the unconscious is not merely a repository of repressions, but an organizing force of life itself. It directs encounters, interests, aversions, dreams, symbols, and even opportunities. When you are not aligned with yourself, the unconscious creates symptoms. When you ignore inner signals, it creates crises, not to punish you, but to force you to look. How many decisions have you made believing they were rational, when in truth they were emotions disguised as logic? How many times have you justified something after you had already done it? That justification is the ego trying to preserve the illusion of control. But the body already knew before. The emotion had already decided before. The unconscious had already pushed before. And this generates a deep sense of loss of control. Because deep down, you realize that something in you escapes you. You feel that you react more than you choose. That you get involved more than you decide. That you flee more than you plan. And the more you try to control through rigidity, the more the unconscious finds indirect ways to express itself. The unconscious mind does not like to be ignored. When you do not listen, it screams. When you do not understand, it repeats. When you do not integrate, it sabotages. Anxiety, compulsions, procrastination, emotional outbursts, creative blocks, self-destructive choices. All of these can be understood as attempts by the unconscious to resolve unrecognized conflicts. There is a false idea that self-control means mastering everything rationally. Freud showed that this is impossible. The most you can do is negotiate with the unconscious. Create enough awareness so that it does not need to act from the shadows. The more you try to be only reason, the more radical the unconscious becomes. This is where the turning point happens. Because when you understand that you are not the first to decide, you stop blindly blaming yourself and begin to investigate. You begin to ask, why does this choice attract me? What does this situation awaken in me? What am I trying to repeat? What am I trying to avoid? What does this decision protect? What does it keep me away from? This kind of questioning changes the game. Because instead of fighting the symptom, you begin to listen to the message. Instead of forcing yourself to be different, you begin to understand why you are the way you are. And understanding creates room for choice. Not absolute control, but more freedom than before. Jung said that consciousness does not eliminate the unconscious, but expands the ego's field of action. You do not stop having impulses, but you stop being dominated by them. You do not stop feeling, but you stop acting blindly. You do not stop making mistakes, but you begin to make them with less repetition and more learning. Most people live on autopilot because that is less painful than looking inward. Looking inward requires facing contradictory desires, old wounds, unacknowledged anger, and childhood fears that are still active. It requires abandoning the idealized image you have of yourself. It requires accepting that you are not as conscious as you thought, but that is exactly where liberation lies. Because while you believe you are fully conscious, you do not question your decisions. You defend them. You justify them. You repeat them. When you accept that something in you decides first, you begin to observe with greater humility. You begin to notice patterns. You begin to perceive triggers. You begin to feel the body before the mind. You begin to distrust decisions that are too impulsive, too fast, too intense. You begin to recognize when something is not a choice, but a compulsion. And this awareness does not come all at once. It comes with silence, reflection, analysis, and the willingness to observe yourself without attacking yourself. Freud said, "Where ID was, ego shall be." In other words, where blind impulse existed, consciousness must arise. This is not weakness. It is psychic maturity. It is stopping the self-deception that believing is enough to change. It is understanding that real change begins at the level where decisions are actually born. If you feel that you lose control at certain moments, it does not mean you are weak. It means there are parts of you that have not yet been heard. And the more you try to silence them by force, the more they find distorted exits. The unconscious is not your enemy. It is a misunderstood ally. It tries to maintain coherence with your history, even when that coherence is painful. It tries to protect you from the unknown, even if the known hurts you. It tries to repeat because repeating feels safer than risking. But when you bring awareness, something changes. You begin to create small pauses between impulse and action. Small spaces where choice can emerge, and these small spaces are powerful. That is where true freedom is born. Freedom is not doing everything you want. Freedom is not being a slave to what you do not understand within yourself. While the unconscious decides alone, you live in reaction. When you begin to understand, you begin to respond. And perhaps now you are feeling uncomfortable. Perhaps you are remembering past decisions, repeated patterns, choices you swore you would never make again. That discomfort is the sign that something important has been touched. If you made it this far, it is because a part of you already knows that it is no longer possible to live on autopilot. That it is no longer possible to pretend control where there is repetition. That it is no longer possible to call destiny what may actually be an unconscious pattern. So I invite you to a simple but profound gesture. Write in the comments, "I want to understand what decides for me." Like the video so this message can reach more people. Subscribe to the channel if you want to continue exploring Freud, Jung, and the human psyche without superficiality, without ready-made phrases, without comforting illusions. Because when you begin to understand the unconscious, you do not gain total control. You gain something rarer, enough awareness to no longer live in the dark. And that alone can change the course of an entire life.